Pessoal, bom dia. Hoje eu estou aqui, né, com a pesquisadora, a Marianne Moen, que tem excelentes pesquisas, inclusive na área sobre gênero, na era Viking. Ela também é parte do museu, né, membro do museu Museum of Cultural History. Ela é parte da equipe também que é relacionada à Universidade de Oslo, esse museu. E a gente vai aqui apresentar um pouco das pesquisas que ela fez, um pouco do trabalho dela, e acho que vai ser bem interessante, porque eu acho que também está sendo a primeira vez no canal que nós estamos trazendo também a perspectiva de gênero, questão de status, que relacionados a esse processo também que havia na era viking. Miss Marianne, thank you so much for being here in the channel. It's a pleasure receiving you here. I think the first time that I meet your work, I think was in a podcast that was called the Nordic Mythology Podcast, that I remember. And it's a very interesting work that you have in this podcast. And you have amazing research about gender in Viking Age. And so thanks so much again for being here.
No, thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure.
For a start, how did you start your interest for research about Viking Age, about gender in Viking Age? How started your first steps in this area?
That's a good question. I mean, my first steps have, I suppose, developed along rather a long timeline. I first did an MA in archaeology in Edinburgh many years ago. I graduated in 2005, and as part of that MA, I did a course on gender archaeology, which was absolutely fantastic. And I realized then that if I was ever going to be an archaeologist, that's what I wanted to do. But then I left archaeology for a long time and came back to a more research-oriented career about 10 years later. And that's when I really picked up the Viking Age aspect of it. So I suppose I ended up in gender archaeology and Viking archaeology by a sort of roundabout route, maybe. But Vikings make a lot of sense when you're talking about gender, because there's a lot of opinions about gender in the Viking Age. So it's quite a there's quite a lot of ways to approach that topic, if that makes sense.
Oh, so you start in many parts of archaeology, and you discover many things that are related to and comprehend how genders and positions of some aspects of people in the Viking Age are working. Okay, that's very interesting in your research. Ms. Marianne, how you can say about the perspective of gender in the Viking Age? How work this type of thing in that time? We can say the men and women's are be in equality with some aspects of how can I say, they have some activities that were putting some equality for women and men, or we saw difference. How we can say about that?
Well, that depends on who you ask, really. There's different thoughts about how it was. I think, and many others think with me, that we might be asking the wrong questions if we ask what it was like to be, male or female during the Viking Age, because it was a very sort of strongly class divided society. So that I think before you talk about social experience as a man or a woman, you need to qualify whether or not that was a high status person or not. And I think that would have had significant bearings on what was gendered and what was not. I think if you're looking at perhaps like a farming family, I think they would have shared the workload across the farm, so there wouldn't have been all that much difference in the experience. But that depends on on social status and occupation, I think, a lot. So I think what I'm trying to say is that the idea that there is a gendered experience of the Viking Age is not very accurate. There would have been very many different gendered experiences, just like there is today, you know?
That's interesting. And we can say that in many aspects that women are seen in some terms when we saw series and TV movies that they
Yeah.
are many more that persons that will be doing activities in house, and we see the part of they are warriors and they are very powerful in many aspects. They are chief leaders for many villages. What we can say that in reality we have this, or this is just a completely imagination for creating for these productions for television?
No, we definitely have that. There's no doubt. If you look at the archaeological record, you have female burials that are ostensibly chieftain burials. They're just not interpreted that way because of the sex of the buried people, the gender of the buried people, if you will. We also have women with weapons. There's, you know, certain very well publicized finds. So we know that women participated in all walks of life, as did men. We don't know to what extent, perhaps, and that's perhaps the main question there. But there's no reason to say that women did not participate on all the same arenas that men did. And then you can obviously have a discussion on, you know, what qualified people to participate on those arenas. But yeah.
That's I think very interesting. We can say that when we found in archaeology, we have the Birka, how can I say, the Birka grave, and that we saw that a woman was with the weapon that
Yeah.
she used in some point in her life.
Yeah.
And we can say that example of Birka are extended for many women, or it's an exception in that sense?
And that's a very difficult question to answer. At the moment, it looks like an exception. If you look at the amount of skeletally, osteologically, and DNA sexed burials, then there are definitely more men than there are women. I don't think it's rare enough to be an exception, but I think there is definitely a difference in ratios. But then you also have very large unknowns. So in Norway, there's hardly any skeletal material preserved, which means that a lot of the time we decide that a grave is male or female based on what we find in them and not the bodies of the people who were buried there. So a lot of the time, you know, you'll find a sword in Norway and you will determine that that's the burial of a man, whereas actually we don't know. So there is a very large component of unknown and unknowable graves in this equation. And certainly there are more than the Birka grave of female graves with weapons, but not to the same extent as there are known male ones.
Oh, so Birka in that moment, it's in how can I say, in our perspective, it's unique in the time, and I think we don't have a much more women like Birka, and
There's a few. There are definitely a few. So it's not quite unique, but it is also not very common.
Okay. And we saw that we have another type of relationship in Viking Age that was called with the Volvas, and they are considered women that are very respect in that time. What we can say about these figures, and how much importance for that period they have, and how the perspective the society have to this figure, and to they have some aspect they like so much her to give them some gifts and some many things in that time.
It's quite a difficult question to answer. We don't know that much. I mean, it's interesting in that the vulva has become sort of emblematic of female ritual power, but it's by no means the only figure of female ritual power that could have been chosen. The thing about the vulvas is because they've been linked with like the metal staffs found in some burials, they are sort of that they're more studied than many other ritual roles, but they weren't necessarily the most prominent at the time. We know there were people who commanded respect and to a certain amount power. The very few written descriptions we have talk about people who had obvious influence and power, so there is that. I think singling them out as the only ritual role for women is wrong. I think there are other things that are equally worthy of study. But it's difficult to quantify in that, the archaeological evidence of those metal staffs, they do tend to be found in wealthy graves. So it does seem to be a correlation with wealth there. But it's quite difficult to be very specific about it, I think. But yeah, definitely a role that gave access to wealth and probably influence and power as well. But it might be interesting to explore other types of ritual specialist roles alongside it, as other people have done before.
That's a very good point, because we saw that they have how can you say, many different directions that was for the treatment, from the perspective that they are, how can I say, they talk with this person, and this person was an important figure from that time, that um, she have so many aspects that we don't have some answers now. But when we saw that Volvo have some a mystery
Yeah,
figure in some aspects that turned her very special from
yeah,
that time. And this is different because we saw that she have a paper in that society that was very significant, and this turned the things much very interesting to research about that.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
And we have, I think we have in Denmark now an exhibition about they, and we have about the Nordic vulvas. And I saw an important element that was the vulva stick, and have it this some perspective that she used that like to use for some specific use for power or divinity, or how you can say about this object from that figure.
Oh, that's a good question. Slightly outside my area of expertise, I have to say. We know that vulva means staff bearer, so it was a symbol of their role. But I don't think that we actually know what they were used for in how the rituals were commanded. What the thing is that from the archaeological record, we find the material objects, but they cannot tell us how they were used. So if you correlate that with the written sources, you'll sort of come up against a wall when it comes to ritual practice, because the written sources are all written down after the end of the Viking period, and so they're colored by Christianity. So the few descriptions we have of vulvas are relatively vague. And they don't go into detail on how the rituals were enacted, not really, not much. So a lot of it is guesswork. I think the only thing we know for sure is that it was a symbol of that role and the power, but we don't know how they were used as far as I know.
That's interesting, because we saw that we have more, how can I say, more questions than answers about that, because really it's I think it's I think very, how can I say, a very difficult perspective, because she have many elements that are present with her, like these sticks, and like using of some herbs and many things, and this is a thing that was a compliment for her figure. We saw that in some series or TV series, we saw that is a figure that is very similar, like in a witch, like in a, and it's, we can say that it's completely truly or not, is an ex, how can I say, an exacerbated vision of
Yeah,
her way.
I think that's a conflation of different influences. I think we know less about the vulva status than it's easy to get an impression from popular culture, for example. And I think when you are making portrayals like that, then cultural tropes from the later years are easy to pull in, like the witch aspect. The thing is that what we know of vulva figures and the art that they practiced is relatively vague, because in some places it seems to have been something shameful, but other sources tell us that it was the realms of the highest of the gods. So it's difficult to quantify, and I think maybe there's a lot of influence from later Christian thinking on those descriptions. So no, I think that the idea of them as sort of scary witches isn't necessarily very accurate with at least with the archaeological material.
That's interesting. And we saw that women are part of very significant from rituals, and we have the rituals of death, we have the rituals of that from some festivities and some celebrations in the Viking Age. How we can say the participation about the woman in these aspects of rituality in the Viking Age, rituality related to the death, rituality to the sacrifice, all this, and we have an aspect that was very interesting, because we have some scene that was recreated from in the movie of Northman. We have this scene that was recreated in with the base of the how can I say, in some other point aspect that was told by Ahmed Ibn Fadlan, that say that the woman was in this funeral was put in aspect that they put her in, how can I say, they elevate her, and she say that things that she saw, I saw my father, saw many of her parents, and she was how can I say, they killed her for being with her master in this type of funeral. What we can say about that? This is have some reality, or this is, we don't know how much this is real.
Well, most people don't call them the sort of the core of Ibn Fadlan's tale into question. There are other sources that talk of the same thing, of people being killed to accompany other people in funerals. But I think there's a double side to that question, because you also have the fact that the person who conducted the rituals and who actually killed the slave was also a woman. So we have written sources that talk of women conducting sacrifices and conducting rituals. So that's something that I think deserves more attention. But definitely, well, not definitely, I would say with a fair amount of certainty that attendant sacrifices of the style described in Ibn Fadlan was not unheard of. But we also know that it wasn't all that common, because there's nothing in the material evidence to indicate that it happened a lot. We do have some graves where it does appear that one person was killed to accompany the others, but then sometimes that picture gets complicated. So there's a famous double burial in Denmark with a woman, and then there's a man buried next to her, and it looks like he's died by hanging from the skeletal remains. And that's been talked of as a potential sacrifice, but it turns out that that's a mother and her son. So, it's easy to draw these conclusions from the burial evidence when we find two bodies, but I think caution is advisable. As I said, Ibn Fadlan is not the only person who describes slave sacrifice during burials, so it does look like that was a thing, but we don't know how common it was.
Oh, that's very interesting. We can say that women and men have many purposes for this type of rituals and related to the sacrifice. We can see that the graves in the Viking Age have some points that turn they different from women's and men's, or we saw that objects for the men's are, how can I say, are put in women's graves are very commonly, or they have these aspects only in one or another grave. I can say about that.
Yeah, so this is where I disagree with a lot of other scholars, because when it comes to gendered objects in the Viking Age, I think we're skating on fairly thin ice. There are some what we call gender diagnostic objects, like swords and some forms of weaponry that tend to be found mostly in male graves. But as I said, it's difficult to quantify in Norway, where we don't have the skeletal evidence. So we think the graves are male because we find a sword in them. Then there is, in female graves, there tends to be an emphasis on certain forms of jewelry and textile working equipment. And there's a lot of buts here, that is to a certain degree true. But there is a vast amount of burials that are buried that are without weaponry or jewelry or textile working equipment, and so they can't be gendered. So that means that, the whole idea that the Viking Age buried men with swords and women with jewelry is not untrue, but it's only a very tiny little bit of the truth. That's one point of it, is that we are ignoring a large part of the burial corpus to tell that story. But then the other part of it is also that even when you find burials with a sword or with oval brooches and textile working equipment, they will very often have a number of things in common as well. So if you take away the swords and the female diagnostic items, you find a lot of the same type of objects in the graves. So I don't actually think that idea of a very gendered divide in terms of burials is true, and I think it's quite unhelpful in terms of understanding the wider burial rituals and the society behind them, if that makes sense.
We can say so that a possibility that these objects have more related to the religion of that time than useful, gender useful for we can say that swords are related to both and have some perspective of.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's complicated. We don't really know what the burial objects tell us either. I mean, we tend to think that they tell us about the identity of the person who died, and I think to a certain extent that is also true. They do seem to correlate with different social roles, but I think also you need to qualify with that they were left by people mourning the people who died, so they could also be gifts. There's lots of different levels there that you could enter.
Oh, that's very, very fantastic, because I not have this perspective that you say after you say that, because it's completely different, because in many aspects we only divided these objects is from her, these objects of him, and this is a very new perspective, and very, very interesting to hear that. We can say that in Viking Age we have many activities that are uses for men's and women's, and we can saw that men could learn activities of women and vice versa. The women can learn something with the men's.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and I think that's, if anything, that's what the archaeology shows us, that those gender divides weren't very fixed and they were quite negotiable. And in some degrees, or in some cases, there weren't any divides at all. So, men and women are both buried with domestic animals, they're both buried with cooking equipment, they're both buried with storage chests. So there's a lot of things in common there. Boats, for instance, found with both men and women. So yeah, I think there's a lot more commonalities than we like to acknowledge.
So in this perspective, we don't have this idea of separation of activities that was this only for the day or only for that. We have activities that was shared with them.
I think so, but I also think it was class bound to a great extent.
Mm, I understand now. And when we talk about demands in the society of the Viking Age, we can say that the only construction of perspective of the man is the a warrior, but sometimes we forget that we have the part of people that take care of the farms, the people that are in part of building things.
Yeah.
They construct some objects, and what you can say the reality in the Viking Age about that. We say that is this idea of the only or all men you being part of a warrior is a construction idea of a society, or is reflected in that society, it's
No,
reality.
that's a modern construction.
Mhm.
Definitely a modern construction. The Vikings, I mean, that there's many layers to why that story's become like it is. Part of it is that many of the written sources that we have about the Vikings were from people who met them at the wrong end of their swords type thing. So we think of the Vikings as particularly warlike. And I'm not saying they weren't, but I'm also saying that they maybe weren't that far out of the common norm for what was, Northern Europe at that time. And most people weren't warriors, and at least most people were certainly not warriors all the time. There were farms to be run, there were, sheep to be sheared, there was boring everyday life to be gotten on with. So the idea of the Vikings purely as warriors is definitely, I think, well, it definitely isn't reflected in the archaeological material. There was a whole framework of a farming society behind the scenes type thing, which probably to people living at that time was not behind the scenes at all, but it's become that to us because we like the idea of the warriors. It sells more tickets to make a film about warriors than to make a film about farmers.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And when we put this part of the Vikings that were traders, and at the same time, yeah, they are warriors. And we saw in sagas like of Elius Skallagrimsson and many others characters. We saw a side of the Vikings that they are with multiple with the of construction of the activities, because we saw that they have many complements. They have the art complement, like some Vikings we can saw that they are probably scholars, or Vikings that they working in some how can I say construction of ships and many aspects. And in the Viking Age, what is this? We can saw that this presence in these activities. We saw that the Vikings are more related to activities that was a specific, or they shared with these activities with of others. things that they don't you are useful or commonly in the routine?
Oh, well, I'm not sure I can answer that question very well, but I think that activity was seasonal, if that makes sense. And you do have some people specialized in trades and crafts, obviously. But very often, I think also there would be a seasonal cyclist to what activities were done when. I'm not sure that really answers very well.
Yeah, yeah, it's answer very very well that. We saw that in some objects they are reflected aspects of how that societies are working, and we saw that how can I say this example? An object reflects that people are an slave or they are a rich person, and this is creating an a status in the Viking Age. How we can say this power is divided in that time? What is the construction idea of many people that are part of a class or in status? We only have three instruments, or we have much more complexity in a society, not only Carl's, Charles, or yours.
Oh, much more complexity, much, I think. You have to factor in, like, yes, maybe you were a farmer, but did you have a fertile farm? Did you have good livestock? There's many levels within each of those things, and I think there's also other things on the side of it, like, you might have been a tradesperson, you might have been a craftsperson. So yes, I think as a sort of general framework, it might make sense, but then you need to nuance it with all the different things that would impact social status, and they are numerous. Yeah.
Mm. And it's a very very curious thing because um, we have another terms that we can say that have another terms for use for other instruments in society, not the only use of this tree. You can say that have much more types of classify these these other persons that are in this society.
Sorry, what was that?
I was asking is if we have another terms that are used, like for define these other people or other persons in that society, or they are part of of this tree. Or
Oh,
no?
right. No, there are other terms. Yeah, yeah. I mean, but some of them will be modern descriptions. But we definitely know that there were professional tradespeople, for instance, um, professional craftspeople, so blacksmiths and boatwrights and shipwrights and all that sort of thing. So it definitely needs to be nuanced. Yeah.
Oh, that's very very visible, and we can say that men's in Viking Age are people that when we saw example in some series that they are part of, they provide many aspects in the family for go to the sea and participate with the incursions, and women stay in home to do the activities that are preserved um, in many aspects of the family. And we have some case that a woman and a father don't stay in a home and go to in some aspect to an incursion together, or no,
Yeah.
they are made the things separated.
Yeah, no, we definitely know that women traveled as well as men. That whole model of women minding the house and men minding everything outside of it is not very well anchored in the archaeological material, I don't think. So no, it was definitely more nuanced and more messy than that.
Oh, okay. And when we say about some activities that are made together with the community, like cooking or producing some element textile, what can you say this activity provides to that society? We can say they create a thing that proximity some people to stay together in moments like example in the winter that we saw that people are more reclusive in their house. And what we can say about these activities, they are made in some part of together, and they create these aspects of the contribution with women's like um, how can I say about that, like in a partnership with these people. What we can say about this?
Well, there's a lot to say about that. It's a very understudied part of subsistence and one life. Cooking is generally thought of in research as something a bit boring. It's finally gaining traction now, and people are looking more into it. But you know, cooking is one of the most integral things you can do for social cohesion and for development. It's also not something that belongs to, you know, the private sphere. Research, cooking and eating is a very communal activity, like you say. So there's a lot to be said for it, but hopefully there will be some excellent, and there is research emerging on that as a sort of social practice. So that's interesting. It's definitely not just something women did. There's, as I said, in to my knowledge, cooking equipment is as commonly found in male graves as it is in female graves. So we have little reason to suppose that only women cooked. But when it comes to textile equipment, that is something that we do find mostly in female graves. So there does seem to have been one of the few very strongly gendered domains. But textile equipment, textile working is like a massive industry. Creating a sail for a ship would take months of toil. So it's actually a massive industry, I think, and not just something that was done alongside other activities, because it was very energy consuming and totally necessary in all ways. Everybody needs textiles, because without them, you know, no sales, no clothes, no working age.
Oh, that's interesting. And we can say that these activities uh, are passing for sons and daughters, or they are divided. Only daughter will learn this, and only son will learn that.
We don't know a lot about children in the Viking Age. We really don't. Again, I think it depends on the social class. So if you look at the written sources, it seems that high status children might have been treated much the same in terms of the things that they learned. But I'm on thin ground. I am mostly an archaeologist, and I'm not that good with the written sources. But yeah, like I say, that we don't know much about children in the Viking Age at all. We know there are some toys and there are some, you know, like little miniature objects, but we don't know who used them or who played with them or what they were used for. So it's an area that needs more focus, I think.
That's interesting. So aspects of childhood in the Viking Age are in a point that we don't have so much answers from
Yeah,
that.
yeah, I would say so, yeah.
Um, it's an interesting point in the Viking Age that I have a lot of mysteries and many people want to know about is the marriage tradition.
Mm.
And what we can say about this topic, because it's so difficult to comprehend because we don't have so much evidence from marriage and from how this really work. Because in some point we use our conception of marriage to recreate types of marriage. Example, I think the scene of the marriage uh, the folk in the series of Vikings was, I think it was a very strange for me because they have the change of the alliances. They have the, how can I say, um, uh, I have a specific word for that. Here's some. It's a part of the dress. How can I say, the veil? And the veil was used in the hair, in the
Yeah.
wife head. And what this is, it's real, not real. It's completely strange for me when I saw this scene.
Yeah, I think I don't think that's how it was. I also think that it's very difficult for us to conceive of marriage as something different from what we think it is. But you don't have to go very far back, or very far at all, to see marriage as something quite different from what has become the ideal now. From what we know, marriage seems to be more about alliances than anything else, pragmatic and sensible ways of combining forces, to ensure, better chances of prosperity or survival. I suppose it depends. But we don't. I think talking about marriage in the past is complicated because we were always going to think about it as we know it, and that just doesn't make sense at all, I don't think. Yeah, it's a difficult one. I mean, we know there were words for husband and wife. We know that there were marriages made, but I think the rituals in themselves are far beyond me. And also, I think the level at which marriages were expected to function is different from what they are today. Like I say, I think there was a lot more emphasis on alliance building and partnership. But yeah, I'm not particularly good on that as a source.
Oh, okay. It's a funny thing because when we saw the marriage of Helga and Floki in the Viking, it's I think made it really totally made with of love. They love each other. It's not using like in a contract or an alliance of parents. It's a very fun thing because we saw not much uh, this use in the series, the contracts and the alliance in the marriage. We saw people married like, oh, I love this and I love, and I will married, and it's only that.
Yeah,
This is a very fun thing to analyze.
it's funny, but that's going to be more palatable to modern audiences, I suppose. Yeah, it's difficult to ascertain, and the written sources are not contemporary, so it's hard to say anything much about it all, I think.
Okay, and we have some ideas that of how can I say, of gender perspectives in the Viking Age that have some definitions from woman and men that we can saw that powerful statements from them, and we can say that a woman could be a character that was a leader of all in a society, or she have this power limited by a man that was a king or a queen, because we have the some ideas of, we don't know, but ideas related to example King Gorm, that was the father of another king that was called Harold, and uh, the mother of King Harold, that was the wife of King Gorm. The name is the queen. What the name?
Yeah,
I think Queen. Oh my God, what the name
it's Thera.
is? Tila. And Tila is a queen that, in some aspects, when she lost the husband, or she became a powerful figure in that moment, or she have an idea that she was a queen with that was a very how can I say, society love this queen, or have the idea she was an important for they, and we don't know how the idea they have, and we can say that Tiva was a queen, a complement of the husband, or she have the idea that she can command that society.
Oh, right. That's a good question, but I think you can flip that upside down. I think royal couples were a partnership. I think we have archaeological evidence. I'm much better on the archaeology than I am on written evidence. We have archaeological evidence that speaks to female rulers, and nothing to say that they've reported to a man. But you can flip that question, as I said, and ask how much autonomy a king would have without his queen. And I just think that these are things that were worked out in partnerships more than anything else. But we do know that women could rule without men, and just as men could rule without women. But when you're looking at married royal couples, I think that things were probably more partnerships than one over the other.
That's just because when we saw the researches in many aspects, they say that she has much more influence than Gorm, and she was a queen that originally was received the powerful to command, or that he became king because of her. They, in many aspects, they say, and they say that have another stones that moonstone that mention her,
Yeah.
from people that admire her figure, and we can say that it's one in million case that a queen probably turn a man a king, not the
It's
opposite.
possible. It is possible. I've read that research, and I think it's persuasive, but it's difficult to say for sure.
Oh, that's you'll be probably change many things if this is will be confirmed.
Yeah.
I think, because it's difficult. A father became a queen, and responsible for her chooses a husband to put and turn they oh sorry a king, because it's much common king became a woman.
Yeah.
Queens, and this is, and I think it'll be very unique, because not many countries in Europe, I think, have this idea in that time. Principally, the Christians country are very difficult to resolve that.
Yeah.
So, Miss Marianne, for my last question of this interview, I'd like to know if you can give us or explanation about how we can say about the new discoveries and the new ideas that archaeology bring us to general perspectives of the Viking Age. What we can say in the results that it's a society with many aspects that was very related to that we need to comprehend more, or what is your perspective from this?
Oh, yes. I mean, I suppose one of my favorite things to say is that it's complicated. we know less than we think we know. The beauty of archaeology is that we're always understanding more. But then I think what's also important to remember is that archaeology is a discipline that doesn't exist in a vacuum. So archaeological knowledge is colored by the culture in which it's produced. And as we see our own ideas of gender change in current society, so we also see our ideas of gender change in the Viking Age, and that is not a coincidence. So if you'd asked someone, 50 years ago to describe gender in the Viking Age, they would have told you about men and women, and that is it. And now we have a wealth of different approaches, and we are finding the material to back that up, but we're looking for it now because we have different perspectives on what it means to be a person. So I think it's important to remember that the stories that we tell about the Viking Age are stories grounded in the present, and that will have something to say about the knowledge that we produce. But also there's new methods, and they're constantly opening up new opportunities. So hopefully the future is bright. And, yeah.
Oh, fantastic. And I forgot to question you. We can say that gender in Norse mythology are a reflection of this society. They have some divisions that was similar or is completely different. They created a new way of say, oh, these gender positions in the Norse mythology is will not be very very similar.
Oh, that's a good question, isn't it? I think there is some similarity, and there are some of the sources that are traceable back to the Viking Age, but I think it's dangerous to assume that there's too much similarity, because the archaeological material doesn't tally with a lot of the written sources. And that, to me, tells us that there will have been some considerable changes in that period. So I think it's best used with caution.
It's fantastic to know that. Ms. Marianne, thank you so much for being here to do this interview. It was amazing knowing a lot of things about gender and perspective of society in the Viking Age, the how can I say, the positions of men and women they are contribute to the society was for me was how can I say, a subject that was very interesting to analyze in that channel. I think audience will be very much more, how can I say, interesting for that, because we really don't know much things about this part of research. I think it was a research that was growing up now and was a completely new things in this area. I think it's difficult to see people that was only research about gender in the Viking Age, and it's amazing to hear that. You have some books that you would like to indicate to people to know about more.
Yeah, well, actually, I've got a book coming out with two of my colleagues. It's called Gendering the Nordic Past. It'll be out on Brepols. I think it's actually for sale already, and I think that's got some really interesting papers. It's an edited volume, so check that out. That would be my best recommendation right now. And otherwise, yeah, there is a lot, but I think that was my best starting point, and then follow the bibliographies from that, I think.
Oh, okay. It will be amazing. Saw that book. I read your first that you have about this topic, and I saw that was many interesting things in that book.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. It's a immeasurable pleasure receiving you here. Thank you so
It was
much.
lovely being here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
I just stopped the recording.
Yeah, great.